I want to talk to somebody in charge. You are not fooling anybody when you say that what happened was a natural disaster. You're lying. It was not an earthquake. It wasn't a typhoon. Because what's really happening is that you're hiding something out there. And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age. God help us all.
In 1954, we awakened something.
Well, there's nuclear tests in the Pacific. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
You have no idea what's coming.
Can you kill it?
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control. And not the other way around.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me today, I have Mike Sutton. Say hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike.
And Kyle Perone. Say hello, Kyle.
Hello.
The reason we're here today is to discuss a movie that is very important to Mike. Maybe not so much this particular movie, but the history of this movie, where this movie came from and how it was inspired. We're talking about Godzilla, 2014's Godzilla. Now, on some past episodes, we've done some commentaries of a previous Godzilla that Mike really didn't like, and as we mentioned during that commentary, this was the first time that we had doing a commentary of a movie we did not like, as opposed to how we normally do commentaries of movies we like. And, you know, we had, especially Mike, list a mile long of problems with this particular adaptation of Godzilla. Today we're dealing with the newer version, which we've been kind of teasing in some previous shows. We've been talking about, I think, some of the Comic-Con shows and stuff like that. We're talking about, hey, it's coming. When we talked about Pacific Rim, I think at one point, we also talked about how Godzilla's coming, and hopefully Pacific Rim will help generate some interest in the, you know, the big monster movies and this sort of thing. But Mike, why don't you first tell us a little bit about the general story of this particular adaptation? This is basically, because it's the first of maybe a franchise. I don't know if they're thinking franchise. This is basically an origin story, kind of like a superhero origin story. But tell us about this particular story and how they handle it.
Yeah, it's really like a reboot. That TriStar movie, that's a piece of garbage that we discussed. Don't even compare it. It's not even close. This movie's taken more serious. There's no jokes. TriStar was just like one big running joke.
That there alone made this movie a million times better than the last one.
Yeah. And they're basically stating that Godzilla's a force of nature, as he was depicted in a lot of the early Japanese movies. And these mutos, these creatures that are out there, they've been dormant for years. And it seems that when they came awake and they were create havoc, Godzilla was there to balance. I think how they phrase it, he was there for nature, to balance nature.
Right. But they're also introducing the concept of all of the nuclear testing in the 50s were really ways of trying to kill these monsters or Godzilla.
What?
In that beginning montage?
Yeah, in the beginning montage, they were saying how the dropping of the bombs and the testing, it wasn't that they were testing it. No, they awoke Godzilla and they were trying to kill it by dropping all these bombs one after another.
Before they realized that all that nuclear exposure or energy, the monsters were just absorbing it instead of killing them.
Right, and that's the other thing too. That all the mutos, they stayed in the movie. And of course, spoiler warnings. I guess we should have started that first. Yeah, the mutos end up absorbing all the radiation. So no matter how many bombs you would drop, they would absorb it. Which, by the way, made no sense why the army wanted to drop a nuclear warheads to kill the monsters at the end, yet they were feeding off of it. It's sitting there going, really? I didn't understand that.
Well, in a way, it's a traditional 1950s. We talked about this before when we were doing some of the classic sci-fi films. It's the 50s mentality of the army of, well, if you can't fix it, nuke it.
Exactly. So, but just going back, the short plot of the story is the creatures wake up. Godzilla is there as the force of nature to restore balance. He fights the mutos, and you have the subplot of the army soldier, which is the guy from Kick-Ass, which I can't remember his name right now. He's part of the special
What's his name,
forces.
Kyle?
Aaron Taylor Johnson, I believe.
Right. He's a lot older now. He looks very different than he did in Kick-Ass.
Right. And it's his story. He's a special forces. He's a bomb expert.
He's like a disarmer.
Yeah.
Like a bomb disposal guy.
Bomb disposal and everything. So he's there, and it's his story and his wife and trying to get back together. The usual story of a Hollywood story.
Right. And his father is the guy who, in the beginning of the movie, he's the scientist in Japan who loses his wife as a result of a earthquakey type of thing that happened that crushes the nuclear plant, and his wife dies there. And all this time he's trying to investigate what really caused that fluctuation to destroy, because he doesn't believe what the government's telling him. He's like a conspiracy theory kind of guy.
Yeah, and that was Cranston from Breaking Bad. And by the way, I was very disappointed that they killed him off so early in the movie.
I was surprised.
I was sitting there going, oh, this is going to be great. He's going to be the force to find the creatures. He's going to team up with the scientists.
He's like the other good scientists, But no, it's like, holy crap.
But that was one of my loopholes. Like, he wanted to get the discs of all the data from the nuclear plant when his wife got killed, and he left it behind. They got the discs. What did they do with the discs in the movie?
Well, the
scientist,
the Japanese scientist, he at one point I think is looking at it and he's comparing what's happening at that when the first attack happens, and he's comparing the charts that he brought compared to the charts that are happening right now, and he's kind of confirming to himself that this guy wasn't crazy. This is exactly what happened. Because the other thing was that we were being told that like all the data from that accident was like wiped out and there was no trace of it, but it's like. No, I think it was a government cover-up. So publicly, there was no data.
Right.
So that's a little kind of like, okay.
It's a little vaguish, in the story. Yeah. Again, that's one of my little problems with it. But I'll be honest, that's the short story. Not going into a lot of details. Now, did I like it? I liked it. I still give it like an 8 out of 10. It took me a while to digest. And folks realize I did see it at Thursday night at 10 o'clock in Manhattan, 42nd Street.
3D?
Not 3D, 2D, because we met up with about 15 or 20 people from G-Fest.
IMAX?
No, not even IMAX. We just went for straight 2D because, again, we had a lot of people to meet up.
Wow.
It was like a mini G-Fest reunion. By the way, G-Fest is a convention that's held every July in Chicago. It's Godzilla convention. So a lot of the people, we had a Facebook page put together by Chris Oglio, and people from all over, from Michigan came in, and Pennsylvania, New York, Staten Island, everybody that was in the New York City area. We all got together. We all watched it. So I got home like at 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday.
Now, let me ask you a question. Because the way you feel about this movie, it's the way that I could ask you the same thing. How do you feel about the previous movie? In other words, these are reboots, remakes. They're retelling the story. They're not continuing the story. The original Godzilla films, the classic ones, were those all continuous?
No.
Sequel, or did at some points did they have to reboot themselves at some points?
No. All the originals, there were no sequels. They were just separate stories with different monsters. Nothing really connected except for maybe 2 movies.
But Godzilla is a character that is supposed to be the same one from the previous film, right?
Right.
So there are sequels.
but not story-wise. It's like James Bond. Is a James Bond movie is sequels to everything?
Okay,
it's
I
not.
see what you're saying.
They're different adventures.
The human
It's
characters don't carry over usually.
No, not until the Millennium, where they had some of the same characters will carry over. But the classic Showa was strictly new movies, new stories, different characters.
Okay, but at least Godzilla is continuous in terms of all of a sudden he doesn't have like new superpowers that he didn't have the previous movie. He's Godzilla with the same powers most of the time.
He did. He's the same powers, but he did a lot of little things over the years that a lot of purists and Godzilla fans people don't like the big kangaroo kick in Megalon when he jumps up and he goes sliding.
Okay,
Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, he turns into a giant magnet.
It's like a new wrestling move.
Exactly. So some things like that towards the end, they kind of made him like a superhero.
So
he had these abilities that he could call upon to defeat the other creatures.
So when did they really reboot from scratch, basically, the Godzilla film?
Well, it's back when you had Godzilla 85, as it was known here in the U.S. That was a reboot. They just decided to retell the story, bring him back.
So it's an origin story again.
As an origin story. That was from Japan. And again, but after that, once you reintroduced him, it was all new stories. Until the Millennium, where they decided to put some of the movies together, like I said, have some of the same characters. So, but I mean, that's a podcast all its own to really go through it all.
So the previous one we watched that we hated, that was a big reboot. I mean, an American reboot.
That was the Hollywood reboot, that Roland Emmerich piece of crap movie.
Almost 20 years ago.
You should take and just burn. If you got a DVD, just snap it in half, do whatever you want.
And now today, another big, gigantic reboot.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, that even when I saw that, like when I was a lot younger, I thought it was garbage too.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because in this movie, they do kind of touch on it's funny because it reminded me a little bit, not too much in terms of how bad it was, but it's like, oh, they're worried about these mutos. You know, at first we see the flying one. It's like, okay, that's interesting, the flying one. They could fly. And then they tell us there's a secondary one that's crawled out of somewhere in the beginning of the movie. I guess it's the one that crawls out of Philippines, is it, or something like that?
Yeah, they started in the Philippines.
Yeah, and the army or the scientists realize, well, that must be the female. It's like, oh, and how does Godzilla realize that this is happening? Well, the mating call is what he's hearing, and that's alerting the first Muto to meet up with the female Muto, and at the same time, it's alerting Godzilla to come and take care of business because, you know, nature is out of balance again, so he's got to come and destroy these monsters. It's interesting that they went in the route of the eggs and we must destroy the eggs and protect from the eggs, you know, that kind of thing, which was like, okay, don't go a little too crazy on that.
Yeah, it just goes back to the creatures, the mutos. They're more insect-like.
Have we seen them before?
No, that was all new creatures.
Okay, because I'm like, I don't remember them looking like anything classic.
No, and that was the whole thing when the movies were coming out. Everybody heard they were insects. Well, then people said they were flying. Oh, maybe it's Rodan, and a lot of people say, "Oh, maybe it's Mothra because she's an insect and it's flying."
Well, they did a little of. I don't want to say Pacific Rim, but Pacific Rim does have that. This giant monster that is fighting like a normal giant monster. All of a sudden, he can fly. They did this here.
Yeah.
And if you guys notice, the director, I think it's
Gareth Edwards.
His previous movie, Monsters, which is obviously this is why he was picked to do this movie. His monsters, his giant monsters, they kind of have, they don't look exactly like the Mutos, but they do have the long, skinny legs and they're towering over things. That kind of design to them. So you could say, okay, that's where he probably got somewhat of his inspiration for him.
And just to touch on Gareth Edwards, when you think about it, he goes from doing that movie Monsters, which he did on his home PC, all the special effects. And then Warner Brothers and Legendary decide, okay, we're going to give you a movie. And you give him Godzilla, a well-known character, and this huge budget. And to be honest, he pulled it off. That was one thing that I was a little worried about, because he never did anything in between.
No, not really. I don't think so.
Nothing that I'm aware of. And to go from a small budget where, like I said, he did everything, put it all together on his home computer, he did the special effects, and now you're giving him a huge budget and such an icon. That was a lot of faith, and I give kudos to Legendary and Warner that they picked the right guy, because he tried to look back at the old Godzilla movies, and Godzilla was also was known in the old movies as a force of nature, and how man splits the atom and created Godzilla, and how we're so arrogant that we can control nature. We can do anything we want and there's no repercussions, but there was. And I think he tried to bring that also into the movie, this movie.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny because while I was watching the movie, every time they mentioned force of nature, I'm thinking, oh, that's what Mike was talking about. That's what Mike was talking about. That the last film they completely decided to turn it into like a dinosaur movie. Now, speaking of dinosaur movies, tell me about the design of the lizard itself, the Godzilla lizard, because I know that you were very critical also of the last time they redesigned it. This time around, there was some hubbub going around that some people, I think in Japan, who just from viewing the trailer, they were saying that Godzilla was too fat looking to be what they imagine, I guess, Godzilla is. How did you feel about the design of the creature in terms of, is it too dinosaur-y? Does it have, it has the scales? What powers does he have? That sort of thing.
Yeah, the design is growing on me. I did hear those comments on the internet that a lot of people thought that he's just too fat, too big, too bulky. But when you do think back and you look at a lot of the past Godzilla suits, especially like Godzilla versus King Kong, that was a big, bulky suit to begin with. Because you look at his legs and his torso, he did look fat back then. But this one, his body seemed to be fat, but he had a small head. Nobody really mentioned the eyes. If you ever realize, the eyes are very small.
Yeah.
They're not big, and where you get a lot of expression like a lot of the other movies. But overall, I thought it was a good reinterpretation. It's keeping the classic. He's got the fins. He still walks on 2. He doesn't walk on 4. He's not a Tyrannosaurus Rex with these little arms or so.
Right, and he doesn't have to drag the tail either, because there are shots of him walking between buildings, and the tail is kind of hovering above, which is one of these dinosaur theories that not all dinosaurs drag their tails, because you never got to see trail marks of tails.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait a minute, how could these things not drag? Oh, they don't drag their tail.
So, and they kept his breath weapon. They didn't say it was radioactive fire.
Yeah.
But it's definitely some form of fire or something.
Right. We don't know exactly what it is, but Kyle, why don't you tell us about that? Because there was one scene that I know you really, really loved about that.
Yeah, when he takes the Muto's jaws and pries it open and fires a beam into its mouth, that was like one of the coolest things I've seen like in a long time.
Yeah, I actually thought he was going to then take the head because he severs the head. I thought he was going to take that and just fling it.
Yeah, he just drops it in the water.
But he just drops it.
I thought he was going to leave it in the pier or something for a souvenir for everybody.
Yeah, but I do admit, Kyle, that was a cool scene. The cool thing is when his back did light up. If you noticed, it lit up from the tip of his tail and came up the back.
He was like charging himself.
As if, right. And one of my friends was watching it said if you looked, it seemed like he actually was inhaling, like he was trying to pull air in and charge himself up before he shot it out. Now, I didn't see that, and that's why I do want to watch the movie again to pick up on some of these little things that you miss. And that was the other cool thing about meeting a lot of Godzilla fans. We all dissected the movie.
Well, speaking about things, Easter eggs, I'm sure as time goes on, there's probably tons of other Easter eggs that are going to show up that people are going to notice, or interviews are going to happen, or books are going to be written, yada, yada, yada. But the only thing a few things that I've noticed is, we talked about it before, there's a scene where they were visiting the scientist's Bryan Cranston's old house, and it's all disheveled and moss is growing everywhere, and all the weeds, because it's like an abandoned city, basically, where the initial radiation accident happened. And there's a fish tank, or some kind of terrarium or something. And in the bottom it said, I think it said something about mother something, and some of the letters were scratched or dirty, so it almost looked like it said Mothra or something. And then inside of the terrarium, there was a cocoon, like, growing in it, which was, I think, it has to be a little Easter egg about Mothra. It has to.
Yeah, I didn't notice the words Mothra, mother on the bottom, but I saw the cocoon going, hey, that's a cocoon. Is that Mothra? And then, talking to friends afterwards, they all said the same thing. Would you see the words Mothra was written on the bottom? So I do want to go back and check that. That's the only Easter egg that I know of.
Why don't you tell us about the deleted scene of the actor who's very important?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a scene that was deleted. We are hoping that it will end up on the DVD, the Blu-ray, the special edition that's coming out.
Guaranteed. I can guarantee that's going to happen.
And give you a short story. A couple of years ago, Mr. Akira Takarada was at G-Fest, and one of the guys, Tim Bean, had said to him, would you like to be in the new Godzilla movie? And he's an actor. And he said, of course, because he always considers Godzilla as his cousin or a brother. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is, because he was the actor that was in the very first Godzilla movie. And he's done so many other Godzilla movies afterwards and Toho movies that he's connected to the character. I actually helped out very little. I take very little credit, maybe about 5%. Started out in New York Comic Con. I went to the Legendary booth. Me and another G fan, Caitlin, we would go there and say, Mr. Kira Takarada wanted to be in the movie. What could we do to get him in there? They said, well, start a Facebook page, do something on social media. We went back to Tim. He created a web page. He went out tweeting, trying to find Max Bornstein and the director, Gareth Edwards. It took him a while. He actually did get in contact with them. We had the page going, and Tim did the rest. But we had a big petition to get him on the set in the movie, and we did. So it shows that fans can get things done, just like that Veronica Mars movie. If you put money up, you can get it. But we were able to get him in there. He went into Canada. Mr. Takarada filmed his scene, and unfortunately for time constraints, it was cut from the final movie.
Do we know what the scene was?
And real quick, he is in the credits, though.
Oh.
If you do look back and you read the credits quick enough, you can find he is listed. I was told that it was in the airport. He was playing, we think, a ticket agent or something. So we had to figure it must be when Cranston was still in Japan and the son was trying to get the flight to go there and bail him out of jail. That we think he sold him the ticket or something.
Because there was another airport scene when the attack near the airport happens also. Maybe.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the scene is. That's what I was told from a fellow G fan. But unfortunately, it was cut out of the film because we were all very bummed out. We actually started a petition online to trying to get him back in. Even got it cut out, but it didn't work. So, but that's a little tidbit. It's out there, and the only way you're going to know is from this podcast, and hopefully when the Blu-ray hits, the deleted scene, they'll explain it, and we get credit for it.
It's interesting because the other thing I was mentioning to you earlier was also that, how do you rate this movie? Like, how can you honestly rate this movie in terms of this is the best film I've ever seen, period? Or do you rate it in terms of for what it is, for the particular genre that it is, how does it fall into place? As far as I'm concerned, it's in that Pacific Rim category of it's a giant monster movie, it's entertaining. You can't take it too serious because if you take it too serious, you're going to pick so many holes in it. And one of the things I kept saying to myself is, well, think of the original films. The original films, I can't, you might be able to rank it as the best thing ever to be made, period. But it's a genre. It's a specific genre that you are willing to look beyond the not perfect costumes and the crushing of an unbelievable amount of infrastructure and potentially killing thousands of people. And you're not bummed out about it in terms of you're still having fun watching this movie. And I mentioned I was talking to Kyle about this, and it's like, I know that I think it was last summer, not only Pacific Rim, but especially Man of Steel caught a lot of flack from the fans because of its darker tone and the fact that there was so much destruction. And people are saying something like, oh my God, so many thousands of people died in the city as a result of this fighting. And, how do you come to terms with that? Like, the death toll must be incredible. And in this movie, again, the death toll might have been incredible, but is it because it's this particular genre that we are not supposed to linger on that too much?
Well, if you look back into the first Godzilla movie showed Godzilla destroying the city, Tokyo, and it showed the aftermath. After that, none of the other original Godzilla movies you ever saw anybody get hurt or killed. Wasn't until the 90s when you started showing it again in the millennium.
Right, but I'm saying they don't show it to you, but you cannot say that a city is wiped out, completely flattened, and nobody's hurt. Just because you don't see it, you can't assume that.
But they did in the old movies. You never saw anybody die.
Right.
Hurt, but
because you still want to keep it clean. You want to keep it nice.
But also remember the first movie was an anti-nuclear war. Anti-nuclear in general, because the whole point was Godzilla was the U.S. He came back and destroyed Tokyo again. That was more of a political movie. Anti-war, anti-nuclear, a lot of themes like that. This movie was more of, Godzilla's he's just a force of nature. And trying to tap in on part of the original movie.
Well, this movie, they're also trying to kind of guide you in the, he's here to help us in his own special way.
Correct.
They've
already made him a hero when they introduced him. It's kind of odd because in the beginning they wanted to kill him, but then towards once the movie in 54, oh, we wanted to kill him. That's why we were dropping all the bombs.
Right.
Then it turned out to, well, no, he's out. He's actually here to help us.
Well, but
it was
the plan,
a weird.
The plan was that, see, he's not attracted to these nuclear devices like the Mutos were. I think the Army's plan was, you take the bomb to the sea, the Mutos go after the bomb, detonate the bomb, and hopefully the bomb kills the Mutos. But I don't think it was meant to kill Godzilla, but they were kind of like, well, if he happens to be there, he happens to be there.
Right. If they're all attracted to the nuclear bombs, and we just kill them all. Which, by the way, one of my friends had said, because, well, geez, that's almost like the ending of Batman, the third Batman movie with Christian Bale, because you take the bomb out into the ocean. He's like, really?
Which, I could get so nitpicky in this movie. And I'll give you a few things. The bomb thing, yeah. Think about this. In 5 minutes, how far can that little boat go?
That was my problem, too.
5 minutes, I don't think you can get very far. And they were talking about this bomb being forget about the World War II bombs. This thing is going to blow up.
Oh, this is like 500 times. It'll destroy anything. So it's like, really?
The fact that bomb explodes, I have a problem with that. The fact that the Mutos are chewing on missiles, and these missiles are not exploding.
They swallow it. They swallow like
some
pills.
of them are like crunch and taking the top off, and it's like, okay, I'm like, every second now, they're going to crack open one, and it's going to just blow up. I mean, just cracking them open, I would imagine, wouldn't that release, like, radiation or something? I'm like, okay, fine. Here's my other problem I had. The Japanese scientist, he's a very well-known, Watabe, I forget his name.
Ken Watanabe.
Yeah, he's a very famous actor. He always seemed to be in this mode of thinking and processing, but not saying much. And he's always like, oh my, in a state of awe. And it's like, dude, spit it out. Whatever you're going to say it.
I know. One time I thought he was on drugs. He's like, wow. Because, he would.
But is it
anything that happened? Yeah, he just had problems processing.
He wasn't emoting, and it's like, well, is this just like a Japanese thing? Like, is it because maybe Japanese people are not as expressive? Is it a cultural thing, or is it just his acting? I couldn't tell. I've seen him before in other movies, and I don't know. I can't tell. Is it supposed to be again? Is it a cultural thing? Is it you're not supposed to be as overly dramatic? I don't know.
Yeah, he was kind of the same way because he was in Inception. He kind of acted the same way as he did in Godzilla.
Yeah, that's right. He was in Inception.
Yeah, but I just think he's as a scientist, he's been studying him since 1954. The Mutos he's been studying, and it just seems that now that the creatures are alive and walking on the Earth, everything that he was theorizing was coming true.
Right.
And he didn't know what to do.
Right, and
other than he knew, don't drop a bomb, nuclear bomb, he says, because they're just going to absorb the radiation. That's not going to help. He really had no
authority.
He had no way to help per se. It was just, wow, we're right. Yeah, they're calling each other, but he had no way to get rid of them. His whole way was, we need to leave it up to Godzilla to take care of it, because nature will fix itself.
Even the lead characters, even the Bryan Cranston character and his son later. The fact that you said earlier they get rid of him, it's like, oh my God, they killed him. How could they kill Bryan Cranston? He's he's the star of more or less the star of the film here or there. It's almost like some of these main characters, or all of these main characters, were not there to be main characters. They were there to support the monsters almost. They were like enabling the monster situations to take place, but they're not really taking control of the film. You know what I'm saying? It's Godzilla after all. And I don't know about the original films, but the monsters are the stars of the film.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to linger over, so what happened to his wife, and what happened to the kid, and what happened to his baby, and what happened to this, and what happened to that?
Yeah, no. Yes and no. I mean, a lot of the older movies, Godzilla vs. the Thing, the nice subplot, Godzilla was fighting Mothra, as we all know, but the subplot of the entrepreneur trying to make a lot of money by selling Mothra's egg, he was the bad guy. You had the two characters that were working in the newspaper and the scientist. They were trying to stop him. It helped the story, but it wasn't always military. And there's a lot of other stories with the astronaut Glenn and Monster Zero. They're up there. Hey, the aliens are coming to attack. Yet they're trying to stop the aliens, and Godzilla helps along.
Well, just like the original ones, they explored so many other territories. where do you think, if this is successful and if this turns into a franchise, where do you think they could go? In other words, what are the top, not the esoteric, weird plot lines, but what do you think are the main points or the main baddies or the main situations that Godzilla could explore?
I don't know. I don't see him fighting aliens or monsters from outer space yet.
Well, wouldn't the easiest thing be Monster Island?
But Monster Island, what? We're just going to get more Mutos. Are going to pop up?
Well, no, they're going to create other monsters to live in Monster Island. Where is he living?
But where are the... Well, he's under the ocean.
But maybe he's not.
He's been living off of the Bikini Atoll and for how many years? Since 1954. They know he's been there.
If this movie has a future, I don't see how could it avoid Monster Island. Impossible.
But again, what's Monster Island? It's going to be another island with more what? Mutos. Because they're basically saying these creatures that are laying dormant in the earth are now coming to life. So what are you going to get? That's the only thing I could see. I just can't see them all of a sudden bringing in, like I said, King Ghidorah who comes from outer space. Unless you're going to get dinosaurs like him that have been out there and surviving, maybe they'll come to life.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines. Like, I just think what they're going to do is they're going to take the monsters from the older movies and basically say, oh, they're Mutos. That's what I think they're going to do. Like, they'll have, like, forget, it was like King something. What was his name again?
King Ghidorah?
King Ghidorah.
The different heads?
Yeah, the three heads.
three heads.
The three heads. Yeah, they can just make a three-headed Muto and say, oh, it's King Ghidorah. And it's like, okay. But maybe that's what...
Hail Hydra.
Wait, that's a different podcast. That's Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Well,
we can talk about that one later.
Any creature that's a creature, yes, they could squeeze them into Monster Island. Anything that's mechanical outer space, maybe they could explore something like they did with Pacific Rim. Ultra-dimensional. They're coming from a different dimension where they, again, you can't say, oh my God, this is so unrealistic, because this is unrealistic. We're talking about Godzilla here.
No, it's not.
Okay, Mike, take it easy.
Godzilla's real.
I think if you are willing to accept space creatures in the original, you have to be willing to accept them in future movies. You have to.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with space as long as they're not like old campy space 50s stuff. I mean, I'm fine with that.
There's nothing wrong with old campy space 50s monsters.
Well, like in modern times, I don't think it would work. But like the Thing was cool, but like I don't think it would work in a modern day movie.
You know what they would do? They would probably treat it like Transformers. Modern army people fighting space-based robotic creatures. I mean, think about that, Mike.
And they're also like switching the cast members too, so it'd be kind of like the original Godzillas, because they're switching cast members now that the third one's done. They're switching over to Mark Wahlberg now instead of Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't care.
We
don't care about Transformers. But if this is a franchise, obviously Cranston's dead. Maybe his kid could be in future ones. And guess what? They could completely. The human characters are not important here. It's seeing the monsters do monstery stuff. Like you said, they're not connected. These films are not sequels.
Right. I don't think you need a sequel per se, other than if you want to come out and say, yeah, maybe there's an interdimensional drift.
They could come up with something multi-dimensional rift
that'll come up and a creature will come out.
Which you can't do that because you'll be copying Pacific Rim, and that'll be a ripoff. But they could figure out some kind of a stupid way of figuring it out.
I guess down the road. I don't know. I still think if you're going to do something else, it's got to be more Mutos, and you just got to change the story somehow.
I don't think people want to see the same monster. I mean, Godzilla's the star, yes, but the point of this is to have him fight other weird things. Mothra has to come out of somewhere,
Well, again, that's if... I don't know the details if they got the rights to all the characters. I think they only got Godzilla. I think Legendary and Warner Brothers only got the rights to use the Godzilla name. I don't think they got the rights.
They have to go one by one. It doesn't Godzilla automatically doesn't give them access to all the library?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
I've always heard that Toho is very strict on what you can do, can't do, and you have to ask permission to do a lot of things.
Yeah, like I think they could probably bring in Mechagodzilla. Maybe they can make it like a military thing. Like, we're angry at Godzilla.
The military wants to build their own Godzilla in case Godzilla comes after them, and they have now again, we're going back to Pacific Rim, a gigantic robot.
But I guess you could do that, but you got to make it in the movie, in the plot, that why does he turn bad? If he's out there to keep balance. And look at the scenes in the movie. Godzilla's swimming in the ocean, and there's destroyers and warships just following him along until he gets to San Francisco. They didn't try to kill him. So
Well-
why would you build a giant robot to kill him? Unless, like you said, you're going to have him in the works just in case he turns renegade?
Yeah, like, I think that the military's probably, like, pissed because they weren't the ones that were able to save him. Godzilla did, and they'd be like, he's a threat. Let's take him out because he's such a maverick. We don't know what he's going to do.
Well, this brings us to the end of part 1 of our Godzilla Geek review, the obviously 2014 version. Please join us again next week when we will continue with our discussion, and we will have some additional thoughts by one of our other contributors, Steve Vavona. So I'd like to thank both Kyle and Mike for joining me today, and we will see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Muto, massive unidentified terrestrial organism. It is, however, no longer terrestrial, it is airborne. Now, the world still thinks this was an earthquake, and it would be preferable that that remain so. Before we lost sight of it, it was headed east across the Pacific and had emitted enough EMP disruption to create havoc with our radar and satellite feeds and reduce us, for the moment, to a strictly visual pursuit. I emphasize for the moment, because we will get on our game and we will find this thing. It is imperative that we do so.
This is unrealistic. We're talking about Godzilla here.
No, it's not.
Okay, Mike, take it easy.